It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, John, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later. Welcome to the latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. The podcast where we go through every episode of Babylon 5, 30 years after it was originally released. That we as myself, Blaine Dowler, and John Wilson. How you doing, John?
I am doing very well, Blaine. And you know, this podcast is one of those things I've wanted to do basically as far back as I can remember. I can't seem to remember very far back, but yeah, my whole life I've always wanted to do a Babylon 5 podcast.
Okay, well that is great to hear. And don't push too hard to try and remember. It's okay. Really. Don't worry, just know that you were invited here specially.
Sometimes I have bad dreams, though.
Okay, well, just never sleep.
And welcome to the Nightmare on Elm Street podcast.
All right, so we are talking about Passing Through Gethsemane, which originally aired on November 27th, 1995. It was the fourth episode broadcast for season 3, but the fifth produced. The fourth produced will be coming up next week, or actually in our next episode, but we're about to go on to a hiatus with the show.
After the break.
And it was directed by Adam Nimoy. It's his first of 2 Babylon 5 episodes. He is known to science fiction fans for directing some Babylon 5 and a couple episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, but probably best known for being the son of Leonard Nimoy.
I thought the son of Spock lived on that one, like, Ice Age world with the woman from the end of the 3rd season. There were a couple of novels about him. I didn't know he did Babylon 5 episodes.
Yep. Yes, he's directed this one, and then I believe married Terry Farrell.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that Spock's son is Worf?
Not quite as complicated as the whole Doctor Who thing, where, the 5th Doctor
his daughter, who marries the 10th Doctor.
And they met when she was cast as the Doctor's daughter.
Right.
And
yeah, that's great.
And their son likes to say that Georgia Moffat asked their son, who's your favorite Doctor in Doctor Who? Now that you've seen them all? And he came up with his top 5, and neither Dad or Grandpa was on the list.
Wow. Well, you can't win them all.
Yeah, and he was also like 4 at the time, so it's just shared as one of those cute things that they do. It's interesting. We are recording this when we've only had, or the most recent episode of Shooty got was Christmas episode, his introductory Christmas episode, when they complained about the episode before where David Tennant got to pick his half of the wardrobe after the Bi generation. And so Shooty got blames David Tennant for the fact that he had to run around in his underwear. And he made that comment on Twitter, and Georgia Moffat replied, I know the feeling. But anyway.
But here we are with Passing Through Gethsemane, which I said last week was a very ominous episode title. I was expecting it to apply to something a bit larger as far as the situation of the station passing through a Gethsemane-like experience, but I am not disappointed by what we got instead.
No, what we got was Brad Dourif playing a completely normal guy, because that's what he excels at.
More or less, I was really surprised at how normal and happy and pleasant his character was, because he's the deranged criminal who was, channeling Scully's dad and basically Hannibal lecturing them to the murderer. He was, he's going to be Wormtongue on Lord of the Rings, and here he is. He's just a happy monk, just making everybody happy with his little crystal birds.
Yes, there's actually a meme out there with his character from Voyager going, "Are we sure I'm the murderer?" And it cuts to like the first 2 frames are actual dialogue when they're trying to decide if he's the murderer or not, and then the third panel is Tim Russ as Tuvok But the actual caption is, dude, you're played by Brad Dourif. Of course you're insane and the killer.
There is no other thing to play.
Yeah, there is a particular type of role that he excels at and that people offer to him, like Luther Lee Boggs for X-Files, which they managed on that first season budget. They couldn't really afford him, but Chris Carter decided, no, he will wait until Thanksgiving Thursday, just as the Fox execs who make that decision are sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner before he made the call and made the ask, and they said yes just to get him off the phone. In this case, Brad Dourif read the script when it was going around just as an open audition, and he wanted this part, and he fought for it.
All right.
And he won, because when you're Brad Dourif, if the money's in the budget to hire Brad Dourif, you hire Brad Dourif for this kind of role. Because, yes, he will and did knock it out of the park. Speaking of this kind of role, so in this episode, we start off with Sheridan and brother Theo playing chess, and Sheridan loses quite decisively and surprisingly, while Brad Dourif, or his character, and Ivanova are watching as onlookers. And he wouldn't bet on the game, even though Ivanova suggested it, because he figures, well, it's one of the lesser sins, and if you're going to sin, go big, which is a little ominous considering what we later learn.
Or a lot ominous.
Yeah. So as we go through the episode, we see Garibaldi following news from Earthdome about this really cocky killer who was sentenced to death of personality. So this is similar to the technology that we saw with Talia Winters with the embedded personality. In this case, they wipe an individual's personality and write a new one on top, which they can do quite quickly because they start with some basic templates. Garibaldi and Delenn have a conversation about this because Garibaldi is an eye for an eye kind of guy, as he says. This conversation was almost transcribed from the lunch table between Jerry Doyle and Mira Furlan. So Jerry Doyle was the one who talked about wanting electric bleachers instead of just the electric chair. And JMS wrote that into his character to give it more realism and make the performances a little easier and more plausible. And Mira Furlan's response was written into Delenn, saying, okay, so you want to live in a world where everyone is blind and toothless.
Which is not an original line, but it's a very pointed, appropriate line.
Yes. So that's the conversation as we go forward. So Brother Edward, played by Brad Dourif, is struggling. He's starting to have bad dreams. He's seeing visions like messages on the wall in blood that vanish minutes later, hearing voices in the hallway. And he's trying to understand what's going on. People planting a black rose in his bag. And as he does his investigation, Brother Theo notices something's wrong and goes to Sheridan saying, it's important that if there is something to this, we find out first to give Brother Edward the proper support. So Sheridan and Garibaldi do their own investigation. This investigation involves Lita Alexander, who is back from Vorlon's space, which is unheard of. She doesn't want to talk about what happened there. Normally the Vorlons don't allow anyone in. We've heard in earlier episodes that anything that crossed the border just mysteriously disappeared in some sort of accident, and the Vorlons suggested nobody try it again. But she sat at the border, put out radio calls that were not responded to, put out a telepathic call, and right before her escape pod ran out of life support, she was picked up. Dr. Franklin checks her over, and not only does she not show signs of the rigors that she went through, she's in better health than she's ever been in before. So she becomes part of the investigation because as it's going through this, they realize somebody on the station is pushing Brother Edward's buttons because they recognize him as someone else who's been punished with death of personality. He was also a serial killer, and the families of his victims don't feel that death of personality was sufficient punishment. Brother Edward has also figured this out, and he is struggling with this because he's concerned he will not be able to obtain salvation and get forgiveness from God because he doesn't know what to ask forgiveness for, because the memories of his sins are gone.
And it's an important tenet that you confess your sins, and if you can't confess.
Mm-hmm. So Brother Theo is trying to assure him God has compassion and understanding. He will understand this situation if you ask for forgiveness of your sins. God knows what they are, even if you don't. and you can still get the forgiveness. But Brother Edward does make a tough decision, one that was alluded to earlier when he was doing the monk's work by asking Delenn and Lanier what the Minbari think. He wondered if he would have the courage that Jesus had to wait in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing it would result in his death, because that's what was needed and necessary for the future. And Brother Edward learns he did have the strength for it. Because even though the members of the station figure out what's going on, figure out that, yes, his buttons are being pushed, he is not going crazy, he is not hearing voices that aren't there, people have tapped into the PA system. They faked the blood with essentially disappearing ink that looks like blood for a while that they were able to identify after the fact. This whole thing was orchestrated to push him over the edge so he would start to remember, including contact with a Centauri telepath who was there just to break down the mental barriers. And the reason that the station crew can get there in time is because they've got Lita Alexander's help, although it's subtle help, right? They have to put a bag over the head of the Centauri. I guess that's not particularly subtle, but just so he can't clearly identify her when she comes and digs the knowledge out of his brain in ways that the Psi Corps absolutely would not approve of.
Yeah, subtle is not the word I would have used for that.
Yeah, I would say it's enough plausible deniability about who was involved that her victim could not clearly identify her. And eventually we find out Ivanova had told Londo enough to smooth things over. But yes, they got the information, they got there. Brother Edward did not survive, but he was at peace. Because for him, this is part of that punishment, so he can achieve the eternal reward. Because, he stood and was punished for his sins by those who understand what they actually were. And the episode wraps up when we find out that the person who headed off that attack, the one who orchestrated this and had that 9-year hunt going, the one who did ultimately beat Brother Edward to death because the others didn't have the strength within them to do it, he has also been punished with death of personality. So apparently the court systems move much faster in the future. It was a little under 2 weeks for the turnaround. And Sheridan has to struggle with, basically walking the walk that he was telling the guy to do, because that killer was requested by Brother Theo to join the order and make amends. So I don't think that was as organized as it usually is, but
you should probably mention the little tag-on scene at the end with Lita.
Yes, that's definitely one where at the end, Lita goes to see Kosh. She will be based on Babylon 5, but she will be traveling a lot. This was to keep her as a recurring guest star role instead of a series regular for reasons that they shouldn't have had to deal with, but we could talk about that later if we want. Anyway, so when Patricia Tallman goes to debrief Kosh, her eyes and mouth are open. There is white energy coming out of them, going directly into Kosh's encounter suit. And those gills that we saw last time are running on her neck. So whatever modifications were made to her, they are so subtle that Stephen Franklin didn't detect them in his medical examination, even though he did notice slightly high oxygen levels. And yes, there is something that went from her into Kosh's encounter suit.
I didn't remember seeing gills before. When I saw those on my second watch through this time, I was like, what? Because my first watch through, I had to keep stopping and restarting, and I wasn't able to have my eyes on the screen the entire time as one of those mostly listen, but also watch kind of things. And my second watch, I was able to pay attention visually a lot more, and I saw those gills, and I was really surprised.
Yeah, you know what? Now that you mention it, yes, I think I might be misremembering the episodes out of order, because I'm, again, reading through season 5 right now as well.
Okay. So I think this is a reveal. Lita Alexander has gills.
Yes, this was the reveal that she has gills now.
Okay.
Yeah, she can now breathe the Vorlon atmosphere without the help of technology.
Yeah. So the only thing I would add to your recap is that all of what's Brad Dourif's name?
Edward.
Brother Edward's difficulties started with a chance passing with a Centauri who touches him on the shoulder and then moves on. This is the same Centauri they interrogate later, and Lita's able to get the information out of his head. But there's something about that contact that starts triggering Brother Edward's visions and everything else.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a chance encounter. That was the Centauri telepath who was sent to break down the barriers.
A seemingly chance encounter.
Yeah. So it's on the second watch through, I could see that the Centauri actually put his hand on his shoulder and paused for a moment before moving on.
Mm-hmm.
So it was basically a telepathic assault designed exclusively to break down the memory barriers.
Right. And I noticed him passing, and I was like, that's not, coincidental. So yeah, really great character story. Spotlight on a person, of course, who's not one of our regulars, but you are immediately drawn to the guy because it's freaking Brad Dourif. And whenever he's all happy and smiles at the beginning, like we said earlier, this is not going to last. This is going to be a problem because it's Brad Dourif. You just don't know exactly what kind of problem it's going to be.
Yeah, the only other time I've seen him play someone likable was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and that didn't end well either.
No, it didn't. So yeah, this was okay. So like I said earlier, going into an episode called Passing Through Gethsemane and knowing it's our last episode before a break, I was expecting something sort of cataclysmic and dramatic maybe. This wasn't that. But this was a really good episode, like really strong storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And it almost didn't happen.
How's that?
This plot was originally going to be used in season 2. So Brother Theo wouldn't have been there, but it would have been about someone who'd suffered that death of personality that was established as a possible punishment in season 1. And then, as we know, JMS is very active on online forums. And one of the fans broke the don't post story ideas rule and said, hey, there should be a story about someone who suffered death of personality, who starts to realize what kind of person he used to be and has to cope with it, with more details than that were a little too similar to the plotline that was already happening.
Oh, so there's that risk of looking like they're copying, even though it was just two separate people having the same idea.
Yeah. So apparently the only reason this episode was able to happen at all is because when JMS then clarified, this is why we cannot have story ideas, this just happened, we have to scuttle this. And another example, Anne McCaffrey apparently had to scuttle a finished novel because a piece of fan fiction hit some major points.
Mm.
So yeah, finished novel, never published because of that. So there was just, too much risk that, the person could change their mind, say, okay, I do want to cut this or whatnot. In this case, it happened because the fan in question was still part of that forum, was very apologetic, did not intend to do this, and apparently made arrangements to meet the JMS face-to-face in that next year, in which case he signed documents prepared by lawyers. So I don't know all the details, but I guess
they covered their butts and they did the legal stuff they're supposed to do. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be a part of a bulletin board about Star Trek books. It was the website was called Sci-Fi, but spelled like the Greek letters PSIPHI, and editors and writers from Pocketbooks were frequenters on the board, and it was a great way to just interact with other book fans and with the writers who were writing books at the time. But there was a harsh rule about not posting story ideas because just the risk of seeming like someone's copying a story you want to avoid. To use a specific culture's phrase, you want to avoid the appearance of evil. So it's difficult. When you're interacting with creatives, you can't share creatives. In a less litigious setting, you get stuff like Swamp Thing and Man Thing, which on the surface are very similar concepts, because the two creators swapped ideas back and forth when they were college buddies.
And they were roommates at the time that they wrote the first issues.
Right. So it's just one of those things where you don't want to limit one of your favorite creators because you said something that was already in their head.
Yeah. Yeah. This is why I'm also hesitant to join any forums where, people are saying, oh, what do you think is going to happen next? All of that stuff. I find one of the reasons I like J. Michael Straczynski as a writer is because when I'm trying to predict what happens next with any writer, I end up in one of three situations. One is that I'm correct. Another is that I was incorrect, but the writer did something better than what I thought of. super surprising with a professional writer. And the third option is that I was also incorrect about where it's going, but I preferred my idea. One of the reasons I like J. Michael Straczynski is he's never put me in that third situation.
Mm.
Right. It's when there's, at least in terms of the big picture, long term, his ideas were always better than the ones I would have had had I been hired to take the series over from that point forward, which is probably not going to happen because I'm not a published fiction author. So he is a professional. I am not. This is why he's better. But there are other professional writers out there. I think back to the end of The Matrix 2. When Neo passes out, I was thinking, oh, Zion is an error trap, and there's another layer of fake reality, which is not the way 3 comes out, but I still like that idea better.
Well,
so
getting back into the episode, Lita Alexander comes back, and it is indicated that she's going to be a recurring role. Now, you said she couldn't be a regular, so let's talk about that in a minute, but I just wanted to say, as we're recording this episode, our first episodes are coming out, so I've been rewatching. She was in the Gathering pilot, and then we lose her and get Talia Winters going into the main series. But I was just struck again by, even though some of her lines were cheesy in that first pilot, some of the telepath, just the predictable, oh, I knew you'd do that kind of thing lines. But her presentation was so much more intense and believable than I ever got from Talia, that seeing her back here has been really interesting. And she is intense. Just her portrayal of her character. When she's in a good mood, she's pleasant. She's fine. You want to get to know her. She seems friendly. But whenever she is in predator mode, oh my gosh, do not mess with this woman.
Yeah, so earlier you're talking about the scene I left out of my synopsis, in which Londo essentially threatens to turn her into the Psychor if she doesn't tell him about the Vorlon homeworld. This quote is on the Internet Movie Database here. Her response is, he says, I would hate very much for the Psychor to find you. And Lita says, so would I, because I'm not with the Corps anymore. That means I'm not bound by their rules. So if someone were to turn me in, I'd find him, and before they took me in, I'd plant a nightmare deep in his mind where no one else could find or remove it. And that person would spend every night for the rest of his life screaming.
Yes.
Only her delivery was far better than mine.
Yeah, that scene and her invasion of the interrogation.
The Centauri telepath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did like the tag on that scene where Londo first says, okay, fine, keep your threats to yourself, but then turns to himself and says, nightmares, the way my life has been going lately, who'd notice? Yeah.
Which is a sympathetic line, but he's not too sympathetic in this episode. We don't see the softer side of Londo at all in this episode.
No. This is basically, he's saying he sees the red flag there. He's not slowing down or changing course.
But it's funny because he says, keep your threats to yourself. He opened the conversation with a threat,
Yes.
So it's, she gave back as good as she got, which, side commentary on society. It's interesting how men can give out stuff, but whenever they get back from women as good as they get, sadly, the women are the ones who are in trouble. But anyways, yeah, she is fierce there. She's fierce with the telepath. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more of her in this show.
Yeah. And that will happen. Some of this I've actually found out much more recently. It's not covered in the script books. I think we said before that, I'm pretty sure I said it on the air, but I think, when it comes to, you think about the oath in court as a witness, where you sort of tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. JMS consistently tells the truth and nothing but the truth. He doesn't always tell the whole truth if it's not his truth to share.
Right.
So up to this point, the main thing, and I think the only thing I knew when we recorded The Gathering, was that there were Warner Brothers executives who wanted someone with more acting experience, and they couldn't come to an agreement when JMS was out of town for the final negotiations to get her in there. What since came out during the Me Too movement is that one of the Warner Brothers executives in question essentially said to Pat Tallman, sleep with me if you want to be on the show.
That familiar. I feel like we may have talked about that before, but that's really gross.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about that in the episode when she, broke down Talia's fake personality barriers.
Yeah.
But yes, bottom line, that executive was required to approve anyone who would become a series regular that would show up in the opening credits, but he was not required to approve guest stars. So they just had her guest starring this season and not being in the opening credits to establish her so that they could sneak her in.
Good. And then he was removed later, if I recall correctly. That exactly.
Yeah, he no longer works for Warner Brothers, but I think he did during the show, because in season 4, during the company Christmas party, apparently he confronted her with the "how the hell did you get on the show" thing, and she just laughed in his face and walked away.
Yeah. So she is great. Happy to see her back. It's interesting, her whole Vorlon story. She does give information about the circumstances surrounding how she got to the Vorlon world. She just is completely closed-mouthed about anything that happens there. But when we saw her last time, she was interested in the Vorlons and had some experience with the Vorlons that she was also hush-hush about. So I'm sure all of that is going to come out more as time goes on. It's a mystery that is seeded for the future, because the Vorlons continue to be one of our biggest enigmas of the show, even more so than the Shadows at this point.
Yep.
The storytelling in this. So there are a couple of examples that come to mind. When Lita threatens Londo, feels extremely natural to the scene, very important to understand how she feels towards his, supposed friendship. But then we get her demonstrating her ability and willingness to break those rules whenever she assaults the Centauri telepath who's being interrogated. So you have storytelling of of two things where one seeds the other, but doesn't feel like a seed when it happens. It feels natural to its scene. Another key example is and actually the first one that I noticed whenever I was thinking about this, whenever Garibaldi and Delenn, like you mentioned earlier, the conversation that's lifted from their round table talk, whenever they're talking about erasement of personality versus the death penalty and how Garibaldi feels about that. And then the erasure of personality is brought in as a story point for Edward, and then is brought in further as a story point whenever the Edward's murderer is again brought in as a monk. So like that concept, which is key to the story, is seated in a conversation that feels like a one-off and done conversation, completely unrelated to events, but then it's not. It's the kind of storytelling that feels very organic as it goes along,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one I think it's what they call a tight script. There's nothing you can cut that doesn't break something else in that story, because everything is connecting dots. Even if you don't see that, there are dots there your first time through. And that's something that Babylon 5 excels at, especially in season 3. We're going to be seeing a lot of stuff like this as we go through.
I want to talk about our regulars, but our regulars don't do a whole lot in this. They support the story and they help the story move forward, but they don't do a whole lot. Brad Dourif's character, Brother Edward, does interview the Minbari ambassadors, Delenn and Lanier, and we get a little bit more exposition on their view of the soul and some metaphysical concepts that they have, which are probably important since the Minbari's view of souls is one of those plot story elements that has come up a few times. But that's the most exposition from our characters that we get in this story. We just don't get a whole lot. Not that that's a bad thing. Normally we go through and talk about Sheridan's developments and Ivanova's developments, and other than Sheridan being completely aghast at the end whenever the murderer of Brother Edward is wiped and brought in as a monk, basically the exact same thing that happened to Brother Edward they did to his murderer, and he's shocked and appalled. There's not a whole lot else that our regulars do for this story.
No, not a whole lot in this one. There's things that they do thematically, because as you said, especially in that interrogation, the lines that they were all willing to cross, that's a deliberate theme that JMS had, where he's trying to subtly show that, aside from us supporting their goals, are they really that different than the people they are trying to stop? In both cases, people are saying, okay, well, the ends will justify the means, and these are the ends that we are going for, and they are noble and pure.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of parallels there, but how easy it is to slip in that, and how important it is to have that forgiveness at the second chance, which is something that JMS firmly believes in as a person, which is, it's why we have the character of Zach Allen in the first place.
Yeah.
He felt, okay, Jeff Conaway gets that second chance. Let's see what he does with it. And for the duration of Babylon 5, he kept his act together.
I did want to mention one side note, just as a sort of an artifact of the, another artifact rather, of the rewatch I've been doing from the early episodes. It's interesting to see how much Garibaldi and Ivanova have shifted since the first season. It's almost like Garibaldi transmitted some of his carefree elements to Ivanova and lost them in the process, because he has become a lot less happy-go-lucky, carefree, and a lot more serious about his job, which granted, times have also gotten more serious, so it's not without merit. And Ivanova has relaxed quite a bit. She is very stoic in those opening episodes, and she, rarely, if ever, cracks a smile, which is not to say that she should smile more, but just as a notice of a change in the character and how she portrays it, or maybe even how it's written. She has opened up a bit more. She's let herself be herself a bit more and not so reserved and formal. So it's just interesting how the characters have changed over time.
Yeah, and some of that is the writing. It was a deliberate plan that I think we talked about many podcasts ago, where JMS figured, okay, if she was coming in as second in command of the station from off the station, she was going to be very strict and very no-nonsense right from the bat to establish herself in that command position and slowly loosen over time. That was planned with the hairstyles and the attitudes right from the start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
that was a plan to shift for her.
Yeah, it was a planned evolution of the character as we're going through.
Which makes a lot of sense in 1994 writing, but also in 2024 writing, to have a female professional have to, I don't want to use overcompensate because that has negative connotations, but to have to shift herself in order to be accepted in her position. And respected and considered an authority in her position before she can let herself be more open and vulnerable.
Yeah. And you mentioned specifically that a female, I think it's a more universal experience, but females experience it to a greater degree.
Yes.
Than males do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone coming into a position of authority has to have that. But I do think that people who are not in the, shall we say, the majority demographic have to tend to compensate for that a bit more, just because they're having to fight past prejudices.
Yeah. A couple of employers ago, I went for a week-long training, and the trainers from the head office were supposed to meet us there, and I got a call saying, hey, their flight got delayed. They're going to miss the first day of that week. And they just figured, they needed someone on the ground to get the ball rolling and to actually run the training for the first day. And of the 25 people there to be trained, only 3 of them were guys, and I had more experience than the other 2 guys. So they just thought that the women would respond to a guy better. So would I mind running the first day of training? This is an actual conversation that happened in the 21st century.
They'll respond to a guy better, so can you take over?
Yeah, that was their explicitly stated reason for asking me to give the training that I was there to receive.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, her shift has been interesting. Garibaldi's shift has been interesting, and it's nice to see those character developments.
Yeah.
But as far as this particular episode, I'm not sure that I have much else on it. I was enthralled. I was extremely pleasantly surprised by the entire thing.
Yeah, this is one that it's easily summarized. It's easy to hit the main points. But on the production side, they're just firing on all cylinders.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It just moves. It draws you in quickly. It gets the ball going and gets it rolling. I appreciate the precision in the conversation. Like, when Garibaldi's talking to Brother Edward saying, you should know, we didn't find any sign of blood on your walls, but I'm having the labs check everything for anything else just in case. Later we do find something else, right? That sort of disappearing ink thing. Like the script logic and structure really holds up. The performances are there across the board. Like, everybody did the jobs right and turned a great script into a great episode.
Yeah.
So, does that mean you're ready to give your last best hope for the standout character or character moment?
Yeah. I don't know how this could be anyone but Brad Dourif's brother Edward, which is not to say you can't choose somebody else. I feel like he, stole the show or was gift wrapped it and held it, and did very well with it. One of the things about his story that I think is going to stick with me for a while, as both a non-religious and ex-religious person, I really appreciated his emotional response to the Gethsemane story, because a lot of the takeaways from that are, Jesus focused, that he has to go through all this trial and turmoil and everything. But his is more, would I be able to stay and face a difficult situation that I knew was going to be difficult and that I could walk away from, but it would be better for all involved me to, and that self-applicatory emotional response to that story was something that honestly I had never really considered before, and to then have him go through what he goes through. And he did, he set himself up to be attacked and let himself be attacked by those who wanted revenge and recompense for his crimes. And to him, that felt like a worthy penance for the things he had done that he doesn't even remember. And honestly, it's for a man who seems to live his life through acts of love and generosity, that was an act of love. He's giving love back to the people that he grievously hurt. And that means that he has to go through being grievously hurt. And his story ends with the coda that I did not know if I'd be able to face my own Gethsemane. And I did. And it's the kind of character moment that makes you want to be that same kind of person. Anyways.
Yeah. So I'm also non-religious, but not really ex-religious. So that the original Gethsemane story, I have read the Bible, but when I read the Bible, when I was doing my graduate work, I spent 6 months living in France, and I was hoping to improve my French. My French was good enough that when I asked people questions, I got the right answer, but they answered in English every single time, because my French was also not very good. So I ended up needing to find English language stuff to read for the 6 months I was there, because I couldn't just go to a local bookstore and buy something. So one of the things I did was read the religious texts. So in the course of those 6 months, yes, I read every page of the Bible, but also every page of an English translation of the Quran, which I acknowledge is not the true experience, as they say, plus the Tao Te Ching and a wide variety of the others. So yeah, the Gethsemane story didn't resonate quite as much with me because I didn't have that personal connection to it. It was never something I was raised to believe. But even without that, I'm also saying that yes, the last best hope is Brad Dourif as that, especially in that moment. Because whether you have that specific Gethsemane comparison or not, right? It's spelled out on screen, so you know everything you need to know for the character. But that could be the first time you're hearing about it, and it works because of his conversation with the Minbari. When they're exchanging information, you know how important it is to him, and that question has driven his belief.
Yeah, to expound on just that last couple sentences, you don't have to know the story to understand the story as it pertains to this script. The writer does not presume any cultural religious knowledge on the part of the viewer. This could be a completely invented religion and faith and story, and it still works.
So, shall we move on to our giving form to the dream then?
Yes, because you tantalized me with that when we were preparing for the episode. You had some specific you want to make sure you had ready. This is one of those, as we've gotten more into the show, it feels like there's not as much groundwork being laid for the future. It's mostly just moving things we already know forward some. But of course, Lita does bring in some mystery and such. I'm curious to see what you have.
Okay, well, I'll start with the Lita thing with the gills and with whatever's being transferred from her to Kasha's encounter suit. And I'm going to start with that because anyone who's been watching the show up to this point is going to take a look at that and go, well, that's going to come back. Right? That's not something I need to point out. I will just acknowledge that it's there. We know now that Sheridan isn't particularly devoted to any one belief system. Right? It's that he described himself as an eclectic. It's a combination of things. The other part that just feels like world building that completely passed under my radar the first time through and only jumps out at me on a second time through the series is when Lanier describes Valen. He says, Valen was the greatest of us. 1,000 years ago, he came from nowhere and formed the Great Council, brought peace to our people. They say he was a Minbari not born of Minbari. According to, and then Deland cuts him off.
Yes.
We will learn more about every single aspect of that description as the series progresses.
Yeah, that definitely had the feel of more to come later. And, Minbari beliefs, like I said before, seem to be, one of the recurring story elements. We haven't heard much about Valen. We've only heard occasional references to him. We do know that there's an upcoming comic book miniseries called In Valen's Name, but I have no idea what's in that. But that, every time they've mentioned it, that name, my ears have perked up. I will say at this point that born Minbari but not of the Minbari is reminiscent of another New Testament quote, in the world but not of the world. And I have no idea if that's intentional or just coincidental, but with the New Testament themed episode, it might be appropriate.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, I'm chuckling here because you've talked about how your name has perked up, or your ears have perked up when you hear the name Valen. I'm betting you missed one, but that's something we'll come back to another day.
Well, you did mention in the pilot that he is mentioned in the crowd by an alien.
Yes, there is a point where you hear an alien say the name Valen.
Is that the one you're talking about?
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. First time viewers that I've talked to, you don't know what Valen means yet. So the first time through, it means nothing.
Right.
Okay, so now the series took a broadcast break at this point.
Dun dun dun.
So as we said, this episode aired on November 27th, 1995.
It's Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Next episode, Voices of Authority, came back to the air January 19th of 1996. So that's about a 9-week gap, and we don't like to have more than a 3-week gap between episodes. So if you come back 3 weeks from now, we will have a feedback episode, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. 3 weeks after that, we will discuss the third novel, Blood Oath, before we come back with Voices of Authority.
Yes, so if you want to read Blood Oath and you don't have a paper copy, it is available on archive.org. You just have to make a free account and you can check out any of their ebooks that they have stored on archive.org for an hour at a time. You can always renew it after that hour is up, but you are able to check things out for an hour at a time. I don't know how they do that legally, if they have seat licenses for the files. I have occasionally seen files not available because they're currently being used. So there is a limited license, but it's also the internet and there's lots of stuff out there. So Blood Oath we'll be talking about in several weeks, but a feedback episode first, which means we need feedback.
Yes, which is probably... I figured it would be easiest to send it to us right by email. So Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com using numerals or letters. Perhaps not, because that's not how the feedback we've had so far has come in, but more on that in a bit.
You can also leave comments on the websites where this show is posted. The first of those is my website with all of my podcasting endeavors. It is johnreadscomics.com, and there is no H in endeavors.
The other website is my website, bureau42.com. It's general sci-fi and fantasy website that hosts all of my podcasts, as well as Brian Rowland's Dorky Geek and Nerdy Trivia podcast and Alex Case's Anime Explorations podcast. So you can find things there.
And you can also leave a review. We love reviews, saying nice things about us on the internet. We like to read them on the air, and thank you for them. We check Apple Podcasts as a matter of course. So if you leave a review on either the Babylon 5 feed or one of our, Gestalt feeds, we will read it and thank you for it on the air. But if you leave a review somewhere else, we might not see it. So just let us know that it's out there and we will go get it and thank you for it on the air.
Okay, and the fifth place that you can get a hold of us is by leaving comments on the YouTube postings that happen automatically as each episode comes out. As of this recording, the most recent YouTube post is Soul Hunter from way back in season 1, and that's also where we've had our first 2 pieces of feedback, which you have already heard in the
years
feedback
ago
episode we have not yet recorded because wibbly wobbly timey wimey
podcasty. So yeah,
all right.
Do get back in touch with us and let us know how you're thinking about things. So yeah, it's Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. Of course, this is for the American audience, and Blaine, I know that is not your country of origin. But yes, hope your holidays are going well. And when we come back with our feedback episode, it will be nearly Christmas time.
Yeah, we're planning to have that out December 18th. We'll hope everything goes as planned. So, in the meantime, thank you for listening.
And good eating to you.